Talks between the Taliban and senior Afghan politicians have begun in Moscow, and despite no official from the current Afghan government in attendance, the talks have been described as fruitful by both sides. Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani has, however, dismissed the talks and said that the attending officials have no negotiating authority. Meanwhile, the former Afghan President Hamid Karzai, who is part of the delegation, said that the talks have so far gone well and that he hopes the Afghan government will be part of the talks at a later stage. The Taliban, however, has now demanded a new constitution and an inclusive Islamic state to govern the country, calling the current constitution invalid and full of Western influence. The talks also come 10 days after the peace negotiations between the US and the Taliban in Qatar ended with some signs of progress as well. Both talks, however, have excluded the Afghan government.
We understand that the government in Kabul needs to be part of these negotiations. We wish that they would have been here today, but that's an issue that has to be resolved between the Islamic movement of the Taliban, whose representatives are here to speak about, and the Afghan government.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke with Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani to reaffirm the U.S. commitment to achieving a lasting peace in Afghanistan. The U.S. President Donald Trump also, while delivering the State of the Union address this morning, had said that the negotiations to reach a political settlement in Afghanistan had been accelerated. The U.S. Secretary of State also emphasized the importance of an intra-Afghan dialogue and the role of a ceasefire in ending the violence in the region. Julia Chapman is now joining us live from Moscow for the very latest on these peace talks that are underway in Russia as we speak between representatives from Afghanistan, Taliban, and of course other member countries as well. And Julia, where are we at these Moscow talks so far? We believe that the Taliban has asked for a new constitution, an Islamic state that is far away from Western influences that the current constitution under Ashraf Ghani has.
Yes, that's right. The Taliban have been making a number of demands during these ongoing talks, not least that the Afghan government create a new constitution for the country which is based on Islamic law. That's one of their demands. They've also been asking for sanctions against them to be lifted and for the US to release any of its Taliban prisoners in Afghanistan. So those are some of the demands that they've been making. But as far as concessions, we understand that there are suggestions that the Taliban could also vow to end cooperating with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State terrorist groups. So that's some progress on that side, but whether that concession will actually be made or whether any concrete agreement will come of that remains to be seen. But it does appear that there is some sort of movement on these talks. They do seem to be going reasonably well between these parties, but of course, as you say, some of the major players simply are not here in Moscow. The Russian government is not actually participating, the US government is not participating, and of course, most crucially of all, the Afghan government is not involved. The Taliban refuses to acknowledge their authority, and President Ashraf Ghani says that he won't deal with the Taliban because they don't acknowledge that he is the rightful leader of Afghanistan and that his government has the authority. So he's dismissed these talks as nothing more than a fairy tale, and he says no concrete progress can be made without the decision maker, and that, he says, is himself.
Right, Julia. Some very important points being highlighted there by Julia Chapman, reporting from Moscow, saying many of the important stakeholders not present at this meeting. So the legitimacy of this will be questioned at some point as well. Julia, thanks very much indeed for joining us with the latest there.